these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office. Experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
for insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all. In-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold
these truths. We hold these truths.
With Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
Welcome to Sit Rep number 16. Thanks for joining us as we cover the most interesting news from last week and arm you with the facts. So, how about a reconciliation update? And of course, by reconciliation, I mean the big, beautiful bill. So on Sunday night, the House Budget Committee, that's chaired by my fellow Texan Jody Arrington, cleared the consolidated reconciliation package that we call the One Big Beautiful Bill. When we say consolidated, what we're talking about, we went over this last time, all of the committees did their bills, including mine, Energy and Commerce, took 26 hours. You have to consolidate all those and pass them out of the Budget Committee. There was some drama there. Some members didn't want to vote for it. Eventually got them to vote president. So it's cleared. Now it's in the House Rules Committee. So there's a lot of gates that you have to pass through to get anything to the floor. That's why legislating takes as long as it does. But I might remind everyone that's kind of a good thing when you're talking about laws that affect the entire country. You know, people ask me if I get frustrated with this job because it's so hard to get anything done. And I say, it's frustrating, yes. However, it's definitely by constitutional design. Other things frustrate me a lot more. So it's in rules right now. And as I say this to you, it has been in rules for 12 hours straight. Actually, maybe longer, about 13 hours and still going. So we're watching every amendment. Every chairman has to testify to the Rules Committee. So they testified all night and testified their part of the bill. And, then Rules Committee members can ask questions. Democrats want to stall this as long as possible, just out of protest. Now it's time for amendments. And so about 500 amendments were filed by Democrats. Unclear to us how many of those they'll actually speak on and how long this process will take. But also, Democrats want to go home for the weekend, let's be honest. So it probably wraps soon, and we probably hopefully vote today or tomorrow. Unclear, though, whether we have those votes. One benefit of the Democrats playing this delay game is it actually gives us Republicans more time to negotiate out those small differences. So it gets out. Let's assume it gets out of the Rules Committee. It gets a floor vote, and we pass it. That means it just goes to the Senate, and the Senate has a whole other list of differences with the House bill that they might contend with. We don't really know what those are. The Senate's been sort of letting us do our thing. They're still doing their thing. More news to follow on that. But let's assume we all get this passed. I mean, here's the basics. Locks in the tax cuts from 2017, okay? Should be clear about this. The Democrat position is very simple. Raise your taxes in December. That's their position. Our position is we need to make the tax cuts from 2017 that you're all used to by now, businesses are used to, make those permanent. Now, technically that comes as a cost, even though we're just keeping taxes the same. Technically that comes as scores as a cost, and hence our deliberate effort to find savings in so many other places of government where we think there's a lot of waste and potential fraud, abuse. My specialty, of course, was working on the Medicaid provisions of that. And of course, one of my favorite provisions, the Crenshaw Amendment, let's call it, ends taxpayer funding for gender transition procedures on minors, puts work requirements on Medicaid. There's a lot of things like that. That was another bill that I'd introduced earlier in the year, and we got that concept at least into this bill. So there's a lot of wins in this, I think, and I hope we get it done. Passage is close. So, moving out of the United States for a minute, let's go to Russia-Ukraine talks. President Trump brokered the first face-to-face talks between Russia and Ukraine since March 2022. He followed up with a 2-hour call to Vladimir Putin, pressing for a 30-day ceasefire. Putin, of course, refused, demanding the same non-starters he's pushed all along. He wants territorial concessions in regions Russia doesn't even currently control. In a promise that Ukraine will never join NATO within 24 hours of that call, the EU and the UK slapped fresh sanctions on Russia's shadow fleet of illicit oil tankers and on the supply chains feeding Putin's weapon factories. You're asking the same question I am right now, which is why they didn't do that earlier. That should have already been done, but hey, The good news is you can still turn up the dials without actually turning up the dial of war. And I think President Trump is probably prepared to do the same. I've heard him say as much in recent tweets. In a follow-up call with Ukrainian President Zelensky and 5 other European leaders, President Trump said Putin was open to negotiations but insisted the U.S. and other third-party mediators shouldn't be involved. He also opposed imposing new sanctions on Russia. Oh, of course he does. And suggested future talks could take place at the Vatican, as Pope Leo XIV previously proposed hosting the ceasefire talks. It's interesting. The new EU and UK sanctions will target Russia's shadow fleet and military supply chains. The EU added 189 ships to the blacklist, bringing its total to nearly 350. The UK sanctioned 18 ships and over 100 individuals and companies that support Russia's war effort. These aging, secretly owned vessels are used often to smuggle Russian oil and gas and stolen Ukrainian grain. They help Moscow evade Western sanctions and fund its war. The UK also imposed sanctions on manufacturers of Iskander missiles used in strikes on Ukrainian civilians. And let's come back to the United States for a minute. The DOJ charges congresswoman for assault at an ICE facility. Now, last week, we reported on 3 Democratic members of Congress and the mayor of Newark who attempted to force their way into a New Jersey ICE facility as a busload of detainees were arriving. They claimed it was an oversight visit, despite never actually arranging one. Initially, only Mayor Ross Baraka was charged, but those charges have since been dropped. Now, it's Representative McIver who's facing assault charges after a video showed her making physical contact with the law enforcement officer. It's a big no-no, don't do that. The acting U.S. Attorney for New Jersey, Alina Habba, put it plainly, no one is above the law. Well, good for her. Representative McIver claims the charges are political, and House Democrat leader Hakeem Jeffries called them morally bankrupt and promised to respond vigorously. With what? I don't know. Here's my take. I've done plenty of oversight visits, and you don't need to storm a facility or put your hands on law enforcement to do your job, unless you're trying to make a big show of it. And look, plenty of members have done that, frankly, on both sides. Maybe I just approach the job a little differently than they do, because it doesn't really win you anything except attention. The goal is to fight for you, the people. Be wary of those who say they're fighting for you, but are actually fighting for your attention. Well, let's go to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court allows TPS deportations to continue. So TPS is temporary protected status. The Supreme Court issued emergency appeal allowing President Trump's deportation of Venezuelans in the U.S. who are currently under that temporary protected status to continue, lifting the protections granted by a California district judge. So TPS allows people in the U.S. from certain countries to live and work here if their country is deemed unsafe. This is intended for situations where the conditions of a legal temporary visitor's home country deteriorate while they are in the United States. However, under President Biden, TPS was applied very loosely, I think illegally, and used to just allow them to come in. Again, this is meant to apply to people who are here and all of a sudden can't go back home. Let's say they're here on a visa and, their country goes to hell. Where are they supposed to go, right? That's the point of this program. But under Biden, they just applied it to various countries, Venezuela being one of them, I think Cuba, Haiti, among others, and used it as a reason to just let them in. And they kept extending the deadlines of when it would end as well. So President Trump removed TPS for Venezuelans in the U.S. Effective April 2025, so that's last month, and used that termination as a justification to deport Venezuelans that are here otherwise illegally back to their home country. Lawyers for the administration argued that the California judge who stopped the deportations undermined the executive branch's inherent powers as to immigration and foreign affairs. Marco Rubio made this same case to the Senate in some pretty viral videos recently. So those are the arguments in front of the Supreme Court. This is a win for the Trump administration. I'm not a lawyer, but it also sets a good precedent for what we view as a problem with individual judges in district courts stopping an entire executive order. So this is a big win for the Trump administration, who plan to end the TPS program also for Haitians, and asked the Supreme Court to end humanitarian parole as well. So this is another what we view as an illegal program used by the Biden administration. That humanitarian parole for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans that was given to 500,000 citizens of those countries. Why do we think it's illegal? Because by law, the law is too vague. That's one of the problems, and of course, we'd like to change that, but that takes 60 votes in the Senate. But it's the intent, of course, was a case-by-case basis for exceptional circumstances. It was never meant to be applied just broadly just because you came from a certain place. That's ridiculous. In other news, the CBP Home App, self-deportation flights began. If you've not heard that term before and you're used to hearing the CBP One app, it's because the Trump administration has a different app called the CBP Home App, which is about self-deportation. So the first flight of 64 self-deporters who signed up through the CBP Home App left the United States on a charter for Colombia and Honduras on Monday. The CBP Home App allows migrants to sign up to self-deport to their home countries with flights paid for and a $1,000 stipend. Migrants who use the app to self-deport may be eligible to legally return to the U.S. in the future. So I guess that's the benefit given to them. The CBP Home was launched as a direct counter to the Biden-era CBP One app, created for migrants to schedule credible fear screenings, but it was really just an express lane for that humanitarian parole that I talked to you about before. Some object to the flights and stipend because it's paid for by U.S. taxpayers. Some people are like, wait a second, hold on. Are we just wasting more money here? But that's not totally true. Keep in mind that processing and removing migrants also probably costs us more. For context, ICE estimates a daily bed rate of $127 a day for adult detention, $161 for family detention. Alternatives to detention programs still cost $4 a day. So you got to spend about $2.1 billion a year to remove 1 million migrants from the U.S. and $12.6 billion to process 1 million migrants, period. Okay, so what do all those numbers mean? It means this. The average cost to arrest and detain and remove a single individual is estimated at about $17,000, according to the Department of Homeland Security. That's a lot. So this is a cheaper way to do it. In other news, the FDA announces systematic review of food chemicals. So the FDA announced a sweeping new initiative to increase transparency and modernize oversight of chemicals in the U.S. food supply. That marks the agency's most comprehensive food safety reform in decades. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and FDA Commissioner Dr. Martin Makary are launching a systematic science-based post-market review program for chemicals already in the food supply. This replaces the agency's previous case-by-case approach in response to growing public concern over chemical safety. Key elements include a modernized prioritization system to review existing food chemicals, with a draft framework to be released soon for public comment. Also, a finalized review process that incorporates stakeholder input to ensure transparency and scientific rigor. And an updated list of chemicals under review, including some of the controversial additives, foaming agents, preservatives. So the FDA will also accelerate review of compounds in preservation and packaging. Moving on to defense, Golden Dome, you've heard about that. President Trump has unveiled new details about the Golden Dome missile defense system, potentially a $175 billion initiative aimed at protecting the United States from advanced missile threats, including those launched from space. The system is designed to intercept hypersonic, ballistic, and cruise missiles with full operational capability targeted by the end of the president's term. An initial $25 billion in funding is proposed through the One Big Beautiful Bill, currently advancing in Congress. President Trump has emphasized the system's importance for national survival, noted that Canada has expressed interest in participating in the program. Good idea. Let them take on some of the costs. Now, we don't have a lot of specifics on the Golden Dome. It's an idea that needs to be fleshed out. The technology has to catch up, but it's not as far off as people think. I think it's worth looking at how the media is spinning it, depending on their political lens. On the left, outlets like the Associated Press are focused on criticizing the decision-making process, calling it unusual, and relying on anonymous Pentagon sources to do it. Well, of course it's unusual. It's a new idea, although it's not that new. Ronald Reagan proposed the same thing back in the 80s. The Washington Post took it a step further, highlighting concerns about militarizing space, not from American officials, but from a joint statement by China and Russia. I think, yeah, okay, good job. That's who we should be taking our cues from. On the right, Red State framed the announcement as a promise kept, quoting President Trump directly, "I promised the American people that I would build a cutting-edge missile shield, and that's what we're doing." The Daily Signal called it a generational investment, quoting Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth on how it marks a return to American military dominance. So I think the coverage says a lot more about the media than it does the actual policy. So what matters is that we're investing in deterrence and rebuilding our defense capabilities, and I think doing what it takes to keep America safe, given some of the capabilities that we've seen from our adversaries. Now, this changes our notion of strategic deterrence. Like the ability to shoot down their missiles changes the whole game. It's complicated how it changes. There's pros and cons, but the pros definitely outweigh the cons. In the end, it's nice to know that if they fire a bunch of missiles at you, whether they're intercontinental ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads or hypersonics moving so freaking fast that you can hardly track them, it's good to know that we're protected. It also gives us options for de-escalation. So, imagine a situation where, and you can imagine this quite easily because you can look at recent events in the Middle East with Israel and Iran. Imagine for a second that Israel did not have the Iron Dome nor our Patriot missile systems to help them shoot down all of those Iranian missiles. Imagine a situation where Iran had killed thousands of Israelis, hit all the neighborhoods, hit major cities. Imagine that scenario. Now imagine what happens next. You think Israel could just sit on their hands? No, they'd have to respond. Now you have an all-out war. They would have to respond. Now, because none of those missiles hit, they had options. They had options for de-escalation. Some people propose that this actually escalates the problem of mutually assured destruction because your adversaries have an incentive to build just even more capable weaponry. Maybe, but I'd still rather have my bulletproof vest on. Okay, I just would. So, another developing headlines. Let's talk about what happened over the weekend. Former President Joe Biden's office confirmed that he has actually been diagnosed with an aggressive form of prostate cancer, and it has metastasized to the bone. It's unfortunate for President Biden. Our prayers are with him. I think the good news is that it's treatable. Of course, there's been a lot of controversy over whether this was well known by Biden and people within his inner circle. People are referring to a 2022 public announcement he had where he said, I quote, "I and so damn many other people have cancer," end quote. At the time, the White House told us that wasn't the case. Look, he says a lot of things. So maybe it wasn't the case. Maybe it was. But look, it's pretty obvious that, and this is you're seeing this in the news constantly, and there's a lot of hand-wringing on all sides. His condition was definitely hidden from the American people. In other news, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth has ordered a DoD special review panel to examine the 2021 withdrawal from Afghanistan. I think we've done similar things here in Congress. My personal take on this, the mistake is really simple and obvious. It was President Biden. He's the mistake. He ordered the withdrawal against all of the advice from pretty much everyone, and we had a disaster as a result. In other news, in a rare unanimous vote, the Senate approved a bill that would allow the deduction of up to $25,000 in tips. Okay, so by the way, no tax on tips is also in the big, beautiful bill. So that might be the Senate's way of maybe changing that particular provision. Again, there's a lot to be said about what's going to happen with the big, beautiful bill, even after we pass it out of the House. So I'm also going to introduce something new to you on this particular podcast. We're going to start adding to the sit rep a highlight of what I think is the worst case of media bias of the week. Now, at first I thought this might be difficult. It's not always easy to find just the right example to show you. But then I remembered President Trump is back in office, which means there's Trump derangement syndrome to go around, and it's actually quite easy to find plenty of media bias. This week's highlight comes from the Daily Beast, which claimed Pope Leo XIV snubbed Vice President Vance, waving him off, but held extensive private meetings with other world leaders. Here's the truth. Pope Leo held a sit-down meeting with Vice President Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio in the Pope's office. They discussed issues, they exchanged gifts, and Vice President Vance delivered an invitation from President Trump and the First Lady for the Pope to visit the White House. So that's what actually happened. Thanks for your lies, Daily Beast. And if you read nothing else, check out Wall Street Journal, a piece by John Goyette. He writes, How to Stop Students from Cheating with AI. Spoiler alert, it's actual engagement with the students and their minds through the Socratic method. Socratic method's a form of asking people thoughtful questions and getting them to come to their own conclusions. Enjoy the read.